Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a short story because it is Short Story Tuesday, and today's short story is about a woman skipping work to go on a date and thinking about her past. It is from the short story collection Closing the Sea, and I will be focusing on the title story, Closing the Sea, by Yehudit Katzir, or Yehudit Katzir, because Yehudit is her Hebrew name. And this was published in 1990. For those who don't know, Yehudit Katzir, or Yehudit Katzir, is a Jewish author who was born in Israel. She has written a number of short stories and children's books and regular novels as well. And most of her stories focus on Israel itself, often including landscape and monuments and various stuff from Israel, and talking about feminist ideals and the process. She's also, as an interesting fact, she favors a two-state solution to the Jewish-Palestine issue, which is pretty nice, because I probably wouldn't have talked about her if she was one of those, Israel belongs to the Jews, all the Palestinians have to get out or something like that, because that's obviously problematic. But it's good that she supports that. I don't know much else about this author. I picked out this short story collection from random, and unfortunately, it also happens to be, a bad choice on my part, mainly because of some of the pouring writing, which I'll talk about more in the analysis section. But without further ado, let's talk about this book. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, but we'll focus on the short story that I was talking about, and we'll move on from there. So, Closing the Sea, the short story from this collection, focuses on the character Ilana. She is a Jewish teacher, teaching, I think, elementary school or something like that. She's taking a vacation day, but I don't believe she's actually told anyone that she's doing this. It's kind of the writing isn't exactly clear at times, so I don't know if she's taking a vacation day or if she's just skipping work. It kind of sounds like she's skipping work, but it could really be either. And she's doing this because she plans to go on a date in a nearby city. As she is traveling on the bus and preparing for her day, she thinks about how she's estranged from her sister or her friend Tammy. Again, it's not quite clear who Tammy is to her, but Tammy is a movie star living in Los Angeles. They haven't seen each other in quite some time, and it's clear that Ilana misses her, but is also envious of the success that her life has produced. She also goes into a store and buys a very fancy dress, but when she realizes that she can't afford it, she tries to take it back, but the store owner tells her that she has to stick with the dress. She goes to see a movie and sees a very strange man trying to sit next to her, and I think she eventually leaves the movie and just deals with the fact that the strange man, wouldn't had unclear motives or something like that. But as the date draws near, as the time comes near, she discovers that her date has kind of stood her up, and she goes home by taking the bus again. But there's some trouble on the bus. I think it's the same guy from the movie theater sits down next to her on the bus and molests her. Like he pretends to be asleep, but he's trying to grab her boobs, and she doesn't really know how to respond, so she doesn't really do anything in the process, and she just travels home. And when she gets home or back to her hotel, she relaxes in the bath, filling it with soap and going underneath the water. And she closes her eyes and imagines being back at her school job and just jumping up into the air and flying around and most likely flying away from the school and her responsibilities entirely, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there doesn't really seem to be a lot to talk about with this story, just a couple of ideas that aren't really like worked upon. It seems like Katzir has something she wants to talk about, but she doesn't really elaborate on it because I don't think she's that competent of a writer, which is a harsh thing to say, but it's exactly what I see when I read this story. But one idea that she seems to be working with is that of loneliness. It's clear that Ilana is a pretty lonely woman. You pretty much see that throughout the story as she's around people through the story, but she's never really with anyone. She's just by herself. She goes to see a movie, which, I see movies alone, but even I'm willing to admit that that's kind of a strange thing to do. She's distanced from her sister or her friend, Tammy. She wants to see her, but she's also kind of envious of her, so she kind of pushes her away. And it also seems like she stood up for her date. Really, the only kind of contact that Ilana is getting is the unwanted contact from the guy who is molesting her on the bus. So the loneliness that existed at the start of the story is further exacerbated by the fact that she stood up for her date, and it seems to have gotten worse for her as the story draws to a close. There's also the end of the story where she's flying through the air, like imagining herself flying through the air. And I guess you could argue that this is a way for her to sort of be free from her responsibilities. Maybe she doesn't actually like her school job. Maybe she wants some more freedom to not be stuck in the life that she's currently living. And the way that you imagine that is just flying away, going to do something different, perhaps making more friends in the process. But I do think another way that you could interpret the end of the story is that this is her, because it says she sinks underneath the bubbles. That's just something people do when they take a bath and they're stressed. But this could be her kind of drowning herself in the tub and representing her leaving life, like no longer having to deal with all of this, and just being free from this kind of unhappiness that she's dealing with. Again, it's not very clear, so I think I'm kind of making a leap at this whole like suicide, like killing herself kind of thing, but I do think there's an argument to be made there. And the last thing I want to talk about with this story, because it's not very interesting. It's incredibly boring. Every single story in this collection, there's 4 of them in here, are boring. There's not a whole lot. It doesn't really seem like Katzir has a point in many of these stories. Like, she's writing about feminist ideals and trying to talk about some pretty strong emotions, but the way that she does it is she just meanders through the story. Right, often like she meanders through the story. It's poorly written. There's run-on sentences. There's extremely long paragraphs that blend the past with the present. So one moment you could be reading about what is currently happening to Ilana, and then the next it goes into something about her relationship with Tammy. And authors usually do that, like especially authors who write stream of consciousness kind of do that. But here it comes off as kind of jarring, and it's hard to focus on the story because you don't know like where the characters are at. Is this a past memory or a current memory? It's really hard to decipher at times because the writing is so bland and hard to follow. I do wonder if this is an issue with the translation, because this book has been translated into English. And I wonder if the problem is that the translation is just bad at capturing the sentiment of the Jewish language. And the result is that it seems boring and it seems kind of run on, but in the original Jewish language, it might be more natural and more flowing. I certainly don't know, as I probably can't find the original Hebrew copy of this book, but I'm sure that might have something to do with it. That said, if it would say more about maybe the translator than Katzir, but I also don't think that like a translator would get this much wrong and make it so the entire book is uninspired and kind of forgettable. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Closing the Sea, a pretty bad short story that no one should ever seek out. And I, unfortunately, have had the opportunity to read. Again, it's something I read at random from my library. Sometimes that happens with books. You get really big stinkers, and you're kind of stuck with that. And so one short story Tuesday every so often is just me reading something that I didn't really enjoy. And not only is a short story bad, but the entire book is something that is a struggle to read and doesn't leave me feeling much better having read it. Like, I could have skipped this and I wouldn't really miss anything. So pretty strong feelings there, but I do think that needs to be said when a book is as bad as something like this. If you read this book before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let me know if I am wrong in my analysis here. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that people can learn about this book and then never attempt to read it. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and vacation-y travels. Farewell.